Hey, what's going on, everybody? Justin here, and in this video we're going to be doing my December 2018 monthly wrap-up, because who doesn't want to see a December monthly wrap-up while we're almost done with the month of February? Essentially, I'm just like a completionist when it comes to monthly TBRs and wrap-ups, so I just wanted to try and get it done as soon as possible so I can do my January wrap-up, I guess, in a way, but I decided to do it with this kind of Goodreads screen capture format. I did it once before when I just went over all the books I read in the whole year of 2018. But basically, in the month of December, out of the 11 things I either read or listened to, I only own physically 4 out of the 11 titles. So I'm just too lazy to edit that much stuff in, I guess, for some reason. And I kind of like this format. It's just kind of easy to use and it's kind of unique. It's just something I want to keep trying out when I can. So that's why we're going to use it. So let's just get started with the 11 things that I read in the month of December. Alright, so first off, we have The Radium Girls, The Dark Story of America's Shining Women, and this is by Kate Moore. And this is just a really good piece of history journalism. It tells the story of the Radium Girls, which in the turn of the 20th century, there were several radium companies that operated in the early years in the teens and 20s and 30s, and on even later, that primarily used radium, like the radioactive element of radium, as a main component of some sort of radium paint that was largely used for military instruments and watches and things of that nature, largely so they would like glow in the dark and be visible, stuff like that. However, there were basically no safety guidelines. Obviously, since it was the early 20th century, there was almost no rules regarding its use and stuff, no protective equipment. And actually, with the Radium Girls, the painters who painted the dials and things like that would actually put the brushes in their mouth with the radiant paint on it because it was easy to use, and it was almost a you almost got paid by the quota per se more than the hour in a lot of these factory situations and stuff. So obviously, after a while, women were these young women were just getting sick and dying and developing cancer, all kinds of things, losing their teeth, all that stuff that goes along with radium poisoning, essentially. And the first half of the book kind of tells their stories, like literally, like kind of on their day-to-day lives, and then the second half deals with basically their fight against these corporations, like in the legal courts and stuff, and the uphill struggles they went through to get essentially justice, which they eventually did do towards the end. Unfortunately, it was long after many of these young ladies had passed away and stuff, but it was just crazy to read about how I don't know how crass like some of these like companies could have been in regards to profits when they knew the radium paint was obviously causing sickness and death and stuff after like a trend was developing, things like that. But overall, I just really enjoyed this book. Definitely a really good piece of journalism. Alright, so now let's go on to the next book, The Stowaway, A Young Man's Extraordinary Adventure to Antarctica by Laurie Shapiro. And what this book does is kind of tell a condensed biography of a second-generation Polish-American named Paul Gawronski. And what he did was stow away 3 separate times onto different ships of Captain Byrd's scientific expedition to Antarctica. It was an expedition that overwintered in Antarctica, and he was he had just graduated high school. I can't remember actually. I can't remember if he just graduated high school or he was a high school senior when he did all this. But essentially, the book tells a story of his day-to-day life while he was on the Antarctic expedition and how that sort of impacted the rest of his life. Obviously, that expedition takes up the majority of the story, with a little bit before and after. But it was just kind of a cool little book, exploring how one like young man's determination allowed him to do like some really cool adventure of a lifetime that most people, obviously, especially during that time period in the first like quarter of the 20th century would never have been able to do. Alright, next up is A Little History of Philosophy by Nigel Warburton. And this I listened to in audiobook format. I think it was on sale, like in an Audible sale at some point. And I always enjoy listening, or listening or reading, I guess, philosophy works. I've definitely slacked on it in the past year. Used to read a lot more on philosophy. So I thought this would be kind of a good thing to brush up on it as a whole, as a subject. And what this book does is kind of go over, it's primarily Western philosophy. And what the book does go over is essentially just a little blurb almost. Don't want to say blurb, I guess that's probably not the right word. But a little section on pretty much all the milestones of Western philosophy and the important thinkers and what their main contributions or thoughts, things like that, their main concepts, what they were, and he essentially just goes in chronological order. Nothing really too special, but it's a great little primer, especially if you're not familiar at all with philosophy in general. It would be a good little place to start. Next up is a NetGalley book that I read, and it's Fishing Through the Apocalypse, an Angler's Adventures in the 21st Century, and this is by Matthew Miller, and I have a picture right here, just so you can see what the cover looked like, because it's not on the Goodreads thing for some reason. But this was a kind of an interesting book. I like little fishing stories, and Matthew Miller works for the Nature Conservancy, that organization, if you guys know what that is. And what he essentially was doing is showing how fishing has changed over the past couple of generations and sort of where it's heading, primarily in the United States, and show some of the pitfalls that have sort of occurred in these what's the word I'm looking for? Not necessarily pitfalls, but I can't remember. There's a word I'm looking for, but I can't remember it for whatever reason. But anyways, some of the things that are fishing is heading towards in certain regions of the United States is really bad. Essentially, where farm ponds are pretty much going to be kind of the mainstay to fish for certain species and stuff, and how anglers, I guess, kind of demand, in some places, almost like easier catches, so they're promoting non-native species just so they can have a better time fishing and stuff. But he also goes in all the places where fishing is making a good comeback, where conservation efforts have restocked many areas with the native populations of fish, and how they're growing, and helping the ecosystem out, things like that. So it was kind of all over the place in the sense of some places are doing well, some places are not doing well, but it does give you some hope for if you actually put your mind to it and actually advocate for certain things, especially in your local communities, that you can actually definitely get things accomplished. Alright, next up we have The Children of Húrin by J.R. Tolkien. This was a fantastic read. This is the only fantasy book I think I read in the month of December, but it was just really cool. I don't know how it's under 4 stars. It makes me really sad, but essentially it's Tolkien plus Greek tragedy plus grimdark all mixed together. And what it does is it tells primarily the story of Turin, the son of Húrin, and his just really sad tale from being in exile, from his second home, basically, after his first home has to be abandoned, his fall from grace by leading essentially a outlaw band out of pride, killing his best friend. I guess these are kind of spoilers, but basically his life is just super tragic, really sad, but overall it's a really, really, really good book. Highly recommend it if you enjoy Middle-earth lore. It takes place during the First Age, but overall just really cool. Next up is Revolution for Dummies, Laughing Through the Arab Spring by Bassem Youssef. And this is a pretty funny book about the Egyptian equivalent of Jon Stewart during the whole Egyptian Revolution and the Arab Spring and stuff a couple of years ago. and how he created and led the way with a TV show that obviously satirized and made fun of like the politics of what was going on in Egypt, which was pretty insane. He does do a good job kind of explaining for people that people that don't know the ins and outs of Egyptian politics of the time, kind of what the major like philosophies and lines of thought were, and how crazy some of them actually really could be. It made for basically easy fodder for him to basically pick on a show. And he tells basically his story all the way up to the point where he literally has to leave Egypt because of basically charges against him for treason and stuff like that. But overall, I thought it was a pretty funny read, especially if you guys like Jon Stewart. He made guest appearances on The Daily Show and stuff. So yeah, definitely check that out if you like humorous nonfiction or humorous kind of modern politics. Next up is Walls, A History of Civilization in Blood and Brick by David Fry. And I listened to this one in audiobook format after I saw it on Nat Geo's Book Talk. And I'm afraid it was kind of a letdown a little bit. A lot of the book it wasn't really a history of walls. He does make that point. It's more of a history of civilization, and Blood and Brick is a better title than just like kind of the walls. But quite a major portion of the book is almost just dedicated to the theory that people or cultures or civilizations that hide behind walls are just weak weenies, and then everyone else who's tough and doesn't use wall is just a better like warrior society that will always destroy the people in walls. And it was just I don't know, that argument just does not really hold up to history, I don't think, very well, and it's very overplayed, I think, by some schools of thought, and it just, I don't know, just wasn't a great read. It was just kind of boring, and just, I don't know, not my favorite. Alright, next up we have actually the next three are all NetGalley books that I read in the month of December. The first one is Potato by Rebecca Earl. And really the only reason I read this one is because the county I live in northern Maine, is pretty much the only thing we're known for is potatoes. I thought this was kind of a neat little read because it's not really just a history of potatoes, though there is some history of potatoes, kind of like, from like its journey from like South America to the New World and stuff. There was some cool like little stuff in there about that. But it was also kind of a cultural history as well, as where different locales that grow potatoes and kind of their connection to that crop. Thought that was kind of neat. So overall, I kind of enjoyed it just because potato farming is just a big thing where I live. Without that connection, I don't know if unless you like really love potatoes, I don't know, it might be kind of a boring book if obviously you don't care about potatoes. Alright, next up is a really silly book, but it was pretty funny, is Race Me in a Lobster Suit, Absurd Internet Ads and the Real Conversations That Followed by Kelly Mann. And basically what Kelly did was put up fake like Craigslist ads and stuff on the internet with really dumb things such as racing someone in a lobster suit or reenacting my nightmare of a fear of a spider. Things like that. They're just like, they're so bizarre and absurd. Like I think one was asking someone to be like a human piñata for her kids or something. Like it was just so ridiculous. But then the thing is, the people that respond to the ads and then like kind of they're like dickering back and forth over prices and what actually would be happening, things like that. I found it really humorous. It's a really quick read. You could definitely read it in like one sitting if you wanted to. But yeah, it was just very lighthearted and just kind of an upbeat, silly, just crazy thing. Basically, just something crazy that you'd expect from, reaching out to anybody who wants to make some money on the internet with these crazy ads. So, recommend that if you like humorous writing. Alright, next up is In Search of the Canary Tree, the story of a scientist, a cypress, and a changing world by Lauren Oakes. And what this book is a recollection almost of Lauren Oakes' adventures in Alaska. The first part is when she is doing some conservationist naturalist work by checking the health of yellow cedars, which are a major kind of indicator of climate change in Alaska, based on their growth rates and like their locations where they are growing, things like that, and basically living out in like roughing it in the Alaskan wilderness with her team. And the second half deals with almost the sociological impact, or her sociological research after finding out the scientific information behind it, between all the different factions and stuff that have to deal with the yellow cedar, such as the native inhabitants of Alaska, the cedar loggers, just sort of the regular people in the towns and stuff, the people who rely on it for their industries, things like that, and basically trying to come up with ways of how people can deal with basically a changing climate and the loss of like the species of tree and how to avoid that, things like that. And obviously it's set in the larger scope of how this is just one little scenario in the grander picture of the whole world and the world's changing climate in a way. Lauren Oakes does write really well. I just felt like a little bit she kind of like almost like talked down to you, like she almost seems like a superhuman, like with her like her basically ideals of conservationism, I guess, and it just kind of comes across a little too strong sometimes. And this is coming from someone obviously who really enjoys like learning about conservationism and the life sciences, things like that. All right. And lastly, the Field Guide to Dumb Birds of North America is in January. So, and lastly, is Emily Voigt's The Dragon Behind the Glass, a true story of power, obsession, and the world's most coveted fish. And this book is a really good piece of investigative journalism. Just kind of been into like a journalism kick too lately with some of my nonfiction reads. But this one is all about Emily Voigt's adventures around primarily in around Southeast Asia for the arowana fish, which can be sold for, if it kept a wild one, can be sold for tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars, if you're lucky. And basically how that has come to pass, like how it has got to this point. I mean, how there's sort of an underground, I don't want to say, kind of like an underground black market, I guess. There's an underground culture behind the arowana fish and stuff, which is believed to give you good luck in some Asian cultures, things like that. But it also deals with sort of the academic infighting and rivalries that go on with sort of these silly, like obscure but high-profile cases, such as all the different species and subspecies of the arowana fish, and kind of all the backroom dealings that seem to go on, like in the from people that normally live in the ivory tower, but there are some willing to get their hands dirty just to get some measure of glory, I guess, and the world of biology, I suppose. But I really enjoyed that one. This book, I don't know. I'm not sure what it was. It was just, I think the writing was just, I don't know, particularly enjoyable for me. It was just kind of a cool little quirky story about, the world's most expensive fish, essentially. I like stuff like that, and just highly enjoy it. If you guys like, I always go back to The Orchid Thief because that's kind of like the book that I can think of that started kind of that like nature journalism, investigative journalism sort of subgenre of like the life sciences. But if you know what that book is and you enjoy that, you would definitely like The Dragon Behind the Glass. It's kind of in the same sort of vein. So there you guys have it. Those are the 11 books I read in the month of December. If you guys can remember, tell me what your favorite book you read in December was. If not, just go ahead and just tell me what your favorite recent read in general has been. If you guys have read any of these authors or any of these books or something related to them, definitely leave some comments down below. I'll be glad to talk to you about them. And always remember, read victoriously.